Welcome back. Subito. Inter, for the first time in our history, lose three Champions League matches in a row following 3-1 to Arsenal. So we have to talk about it. We have to give you the facts, the realism. That's why you got me, Andrew, here with Jay. Miko, as always, after a loss, calls in sick, too ashamed to talk about it. Jay, I know I can always rely on you to spit facts.
Good evening. Uh, as former Arsenal manager Unai Emery would say, yeah, it's a black day in our history. Three consecutive Champions League losses for the first time ever, as you said, and yet another big game where we come up short. It's, I mean, what can you even say, really? There's so many moving pieces in all this, so many causes, so many contributing factors, so many areas where even though you might not be overly optimistic, the team still finds ways to disappoint and new lows to reach. So let's get into it.
I'm gonna mostly take a back seat on this one and let you do your thing because I know you're the Arsenal expert. I just want to say that for the game as a whole, I did not think we played that bad. I didn't think we got played off the pitch. This was just more of the same for me, where the first 10 minutes of the game, we looked awful. We find ourselves after the phenomenal Sucic goal. And from that point on, we looked decent. We're like, okay, we're in this match. But then you just had classic Inter. All we do is concede goals on set pieces now. That's just who we are. So I think this was our third or fourth goal conceded on a set piece in the Champions League. And when this team has to chase a lead, it never works out for us. And you knew we were finished at that point. So I'm not surprised at all by the results. I wasn't here for the predictions with you guys, but you were the only one, I believe, who successfully predicted an Arsenal win. That was the correct prediction, obviously, in hindsight. But Arsenal are playing like the best team on the planet. We're barely the best team in Italy. So I'm not surprised by anything that happened on the pitch yesterday, but like you said, it's hard not to have this conversation every time we lose one of these matches and start doing the full autopsy of everything wrong with this team, this club, management, everything like that. So let me slide over to the back seat, the passenger seat here, give you the reins. Where do you want to take this?
Ooh, I'm not really sure, to be completely honest with you. I have a lot of thoughts, and as always, they are wildly disorganized, vaguely sexual, and just generally inappropriate. But I'm gonna start from the beginning of the match, and we could just at least start chronologically. And I think the difference between the two teams and the approach was really stark. I don't want to do this Pioli thing and talk about we were the better team in the first 4 minutes or some nonsense because the first 4 minutes of a game is usually inconsequential to the outcome of the remaining 86 minutes, right? But in this instance, I think the difference could be seen right off the bat. I mean, we looked just woefully underprepared. We looked what's the opposite to being switched on, to being alert? We looked sleepy. We looked complacent. It was as if we were just playing some routine training match, and not in a good way, but in like a jovial way, in a casual way. And Arsenal looked the exact opposite. They looked incredibly purposeful. They looked like they had a game plan. They looked like they were reading off a flow chart or some kind of checklist which was easy to follow, and they just did steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And within the first 2 minutes, they were just passing it in and around our box. They were putting crosses into the box unopposed. They were getting shots on target. And again, our response to this was casual. Within the first 6 fucking seconds of the game, Arsenal launched a long ball, and Bastoni chose deliberately not to contest the header. He got beat out by some some guy like 10 to 15 centimeters shorter than him. I think it was Merino or maybe it was even Trossard. But this is a recurring trend. On that note, my patience with this player is wearing extraordinarily thin. Uh, I think he's always been a weak defender defensively, but the most, I guess, egregious of his mistakes or the most grave of his sins is just the where's the development in this guy's mentality for a guy who considers himself a lifelong Interista, who has said in the past that he wants to captain this club one day, who wore the armband tonight after Lautaro came off. Where's the leadership? Where's the passion? Where's the fight? Bastoni is just soft. He's soft. He's always been soft. And I don't think this suddenly comes to you when you're 26, 27, right? Watch a Cherby for all his faults, for all his failures. He will give his entire body to try and stop the forward he's marking from winning the ball. Anytime a ball is passed forward to the striker, he'll be at their back. You saw him literally backpacking. I think it was Gyökeres in the second half when he got booked. He will commit to all sorts of ridiculous antics, but most of all, he will throw himself at challenges to win headers, to win tackles, and to stop that ball from being played into the opposition striker. Whereas Bastoni just he's so casual about it. Just before we like move on to anything else, like, am I the only one who's deeply bothered by this? Like, maybe it's an old fashioned way of thinking, but whatever happened to you can't let a high ball bounce in your third. Bastoni just lets them bounce all the time.
Bastoni's defending is not what you would expect from an Italian center back. You expect someone who's a bit more rugged. You expect someone who's a bit more physical, and he's a finesse player. He likes being on the edges of the pitch. He likes being able to swing in crosses, and he's not someone who's going to just get in there when things get mucky. And I remember watching him at the Euro when Italy won it all back in 2021, and the English commentators during the match had no clue what they were talking about, and they were commenting on how Bastoni's really an old school Italian defender. And then as the match went on, the commentator was correcting himself, realizing he was wrong because not only is Bastoni not like this hard, rugged center back, but he's also just so talented on the flank. And really, what we have is we have a left back. That's the player he is, and I get really annoyed by Bastoni's comments in the press when he talks about like the similarities to the NBA and how we need to be okay losing because clearly he's okay losing. He just doesn't strike me as someone who these losses are eating away at him the way they do at us. So I've been annoyed with Bastoni's off the pitch comments lately. In terms of his on the pitch performances, I mean, nothing yesterday surprised me. We can put together a video collaboration of him passing up headers that lead to dangerous chances for the other team.
Yeah, absolutely. And good point with regards to his attitude because I think that's the best place to pick up and to focus on because what can you say about this, guys? There's, as you said about Bastoni, he's clearly okay with losing, and that's the disease that infects the rest of this team. I've said it before that this club, from top to bottom, really failed to understand the significance of their situation in the post Conte era. We had a squad fresh off dominating the league in a situation or landscape in Italy where other clubs had gone through dismal seasons with failed managerial recruitment and failed transfer campaigns. There was a massive power vacuum at the top. We were the only ones, and yet we squandered the chance to consolidate our position as the dominating force in Italy for the next half to full decade. Uh, I blame that on literally fucking everyone from Suning to Marotta to the players. But to focus on the players, I've always been critical of how complacent this team has been and how they seem to be okay to just like win a Scudetto and leave it at that. They don't have the same kind of ruthless hunger that a team like Juventus or Bayern Munich or Barcelona or Real Madrid have to just win and win and win and just keep winning. Maybe things get boring for the neutral, for the observer, but for the elite competitive athlete, isn't that what you want? If you're purely playing for the love of the game, then fuck off and go play in the lower leagues. Go play where there isn't an expectation to win and it is all just about having fun and expressing yourself. These guys are so easy to so quick to give in. And, you know, look, not even I'm sick enough to make pro Milan jokes at this juncture, but there is something to be said about their current situation in the league, where very, very accurately, I think it was yourself, Andrew, who described them a few weeks ago as just these fucking cockroaches who just won't die. But there's something to be said about that. Whereas our team is just so quick to say, yeah, we tried, and they tried just enough where they can make themselves believe that they put in an effort and to be okay with it. They tried just enough, not enough to win, of course, not enough to draw, but just enough to make themselves feel better, and then they're okay to lose. And I can't describe how much I hate that in this team. I can see it seeping from every player, be it Barella, Lautaro, Thuram, Bastoni, and it really fucking bothers me. And, you know, um, there's a famous quote from Mourinho where he was telling his, I believe it was his Chelsea locker room, saying that, look, you might not be able to win, but you cannot lose. You simply cannot lose. He was taking the possibility of losing out of the list of potential outcomes. And this team just doesn't have that.
I have a hard time reconciling how we got to this point when you think about the Inzaghi era, because we knew exactly where we were post Conte. You had an owner in financial ruin who was on the brink. You had a group of players who had just won a Scudetto together for the first time in forever. And despite the what would otherwise be an upward trajectory, we immediately were back on the defensive. So then you hire a manager in Inzaghi, who I think it's worth pointing out that a lot of people did not want. He was an unpopular hire in many circles. And you see the natural progression of Inzaghi. And up until last year, everything was fine because the first year is bad for sure. Like you choke away the Scudetto, but then you get reach Champions League final. You put up a valiant performance against City, and everyone reflects back on Inter like, whoa, like we didn't realize they had this in them. We had more XG than City. Like the overall sentiment around Inter was fantastic after the City loss, and we all walked away with our heads held high. And then you go and you put together the most dominant Scudetto win of this club's recent history of this team's last 15, 20 years. And everything was good. Even though you had the early Champions League exit, you felt like we had kind of an era of winning upon us. And in the last year and a half, it has just all collapsed to the floor. It's all it's all gone away. And it's hard because I feel like we keep playing the blame game as to who's this drastic shift in mentality is attributable to. And you do have to blame Inzaghi to a certain extent, and I guess Kivu now, you have to blame the players. But for me, this just keeps falling back to management and our ownership situation and just the lack of turnover in the squad. If I were to ask you like who the last major piece of this Inter team that we signed is, who would your answer be? What would you say, Taram like 5 years ago? Would you go further than that and say it was Bastoni or Barella 7 years ago? Like, it's been a long time since we've signed someone into this team who is one of the core tenets of this team, one of the pillars.
and
I,
who was intended to be one of the pillars.
yes, a big money acquisition. Barella was at the time one of the second or third most expensive player in Inter history. Lukaku, most expensive player in Inter history. We were buying players with the intent of them being stars. We don't do that anymore. But look at what, say, Milan's squad looked like back in 2020. None of those names are still there. Look back at the Juve squad from 2020. None of the names are still there. You might have one guy like Liao. You might have one guy like Bremer's been there a while now, but like Kessié, Teo, like these guys have all moved on to different things. Having the same core of players together for 6 or 7 years in the modern era of football is unheard of. And that's why that I truly think is if I were to psychoanalyze you for a second, when we sit down and you're sick of Bastoni, you're sick of Barella, you're sick of Lautaro, a good amount of this is just like you are that old married couple. You've been with these guys for too long, and this isn't what happens at this point in these careers. Normally, people have moved on, or if they've been replaced with a new, young, hot up and coming thing. And we're not doing that. So we're just kind of playing out the string. And we all know where this is going to lead us. And it might be enough for a Scudetto this season. But when you have a core of players who isn't getting better anymore and you're not doing anything to stop that aging process, it, this isn't going to end pretty. And you can give Morata as much credit as you want because we've seen what this looks like on the other hand, right? We lived through the banter era where this thing was a complete disaster and we could barely qualify for the Champions League and we know what the downside looks like, but right now there's not much upside. Like there is no conceivable way this team competes for a Champions League title in the next 5 seasons unless there is a drastic changing in the squad. And I do blame Morata for that because, as I always say, there's just a lack of boldness. Like this, there needed to be a moment where he said someone needed to leave Inter, someone wasn't good enough for Inter, and we went out and we purchased like a new pillar. And we haven't done that. We have the same core of players, and as a result, we keep doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Yeah, and not only are these pillars not being replaced, for the most part, even the supporting act are not being refreshed with enough frequency or with enough intent either. We've got, I mean, I don't know how much I blame Kivu, to be honest. And trust me, I still do blame him to an extent, but Kivu inherited the same squad that suffered a just generational humiliation at the end of last season. And I mean, if it, other than Akanji, it's the exact same starting 11. And I remember arguing with like Miko about this at the time, but I was saying that, partly being melodramatic, partly trolling and just being a general prick, but partly being honest that, look, you don't recover from a fucking 5-0 Champions League final loss just like that. It doesn't happen the same way you recover from getting knocked out of the Champions League in like the quarterfinals or semifinals or whatever. It doesn't happen like that. This club suffered a catastrophic fracture to the very facade of its global appeal, to its marketability, to its reputation, and to the players' mentality as well. There's no coming back from that. You can't just keep the same core of guys and try and go again. I really just don't believe it works. And the funny thing is that last season we were already on a downward trajectory. We saw how much we struggled in the league, slumping to second place after throwing away the title essentially, despite the fact that we dominated the league. Well, how many points did we get when we won the Scudetto 2 seasons ago? Like 97 or something? Despite keeping the same squad by and large, you saw that they were just incapable of getting back on the horse and going to the races again. last season was a really strange anomaly in the fact that we managed to get to the to the Champions League final while simultaneously being on a massive decline, and it's only through the sheer magic of Inzaghi's Champions League DNA that he and he alone brought to this club. I remind you, because Inter have always, in my lifetime, with the exception of one brief period under Mourinho, one shining season, and for 4 years under Inzaghi, the remaining 20 years of my fandom, Inter have always been a joke in the Champions League. And it's only through Inzaghi's Champions League magic that we managed to get to a second final. Yes, he deserves a lot of the blame for how things ended, but if it wasn't for that, last season would have been significantly worse. And I was so fucking triggered by this morning's result that when I got into the office, rather than actually do any fucking work, I just pulled up a spreadsheet and went to like our live score page and pulled our results and just did a quick comparison. But let me hit you with some cold hard statistics. Last season, we played 17 games against big opponents. This season so far, we've played seven. So 24 altogether since the beginning of last season. Firstly, what defines a big team here? Let's be fucking real. I'm not counting the Bolognas, the Atalantas, the Lazios, even the Romas in this list because any self-respecting Interista would be offended to be compared to these clubs. We should not compare ourselves to these clubs. We should not allow ourselves to be considered at that level. I'm talking about the traditional hegemonic big forces and the recently uber rich elite, such as nouveau rich Man City and PSG. Even if they were not historically big clubs, they are big clubs now. I'm talking about these kinds of clubs, the Juves, the Milans. I guess Napoli's in a bit of a weird one, a weird kind of area, but I'll include them as well. In any instance, let me ask you, of the 24 games against big clubs since last season, how many do you think we've won?
I think the answer would be 2, right? 1 against Bayern, 1 against Barcelona.
Eh, It's three. One against Arsenal right at the beginning of the CL
Ah,
campaign.
that's right, that's right.
And yeah, one against Barcelona, one against Bayern Munich. 3 games out of 24. That is a 13% win rate. And we've lost 50% of the games this season. But last season, though, we at least drew about half. We drew 8 out of the 17 games, lost 6, won 3. This season, we have an 86% loss rate, guys. This is catastrophic. Like, and goes to what I was saying earlier about like, Milan being cockroaches and refusing to lose, refusing to die. Like, these guys can't even draw. I would be like 1/10 as upset as I am now if we could at least maintain a record similar to what we achieved last season. Again, 3 wins out of all the wins from the big games, by the way, came last season. Obviously, there's none this season. So 3 wins out of 17 is absolutely fucking nothing to write home about. But at least we drew 8 of them.
I
So in other words, we were undefeated in 11 out of the 17 games. This this season we have a 0% win rate in the big games. Like I said, 80%, 86% uh, loss rate. We have 0 clean sheets, and we have 2 games where we failed to score, and we have a -8 goal difference, meaning that we concede twice as many goals as we score. There's a continuous decline seen from last season, and I think it has everything to do with the fact that while this team was already sliding down, seemingly having lost, you know, on a downwards trajectory, having lost the motivation after winning the Scudetto easily, making it to the Champions League final thanks to the virtue of Inzaghi's continental football. Uh, but the slide has continued since then. They're still not motivated. They still can't pull themselves up. They still can't snap out of it and just say, look, enough is enough. Let's just win a fucking game. They are so easy to surrender, so quick to give up. And yeah, it's sad because I don't really think there is a cure to this other than time and the natural cycle of replacement, because Lord knows that this management and this godforsaken ownership are not going to take the football the footballists approach to this because they don't know football.
There's a good point you made I want to hit on, which is this team's ability to see out results, because that's been what has plagued us in the Champions League this year. If you look at the league performance under Kivu, I'm mostly okay with it. There were a couple losses early in the season. Since then, he has righted the ship. Just getting a point against Napoli was a step in the right direction. And even though it's an ailing Napoli side, I'm willing to give Kivu one more shot at Juve and Milan before I write off his Serie A campaign, especially with us sitting in first place. But in the Champions League, there's been a huge step down from Kivu to from Inzaghi to Kivu, which can be expected given Kivu is a complete rookie manager. But twice in this Champions League campaign, we've been in a situation to see out our results and get a draw, and both times we failed. There was the Atletico game where we made a great comeback. We were really taking the game to Atletico. We had tied it up 2-2. We completely switch off on a set piece. Tell me if you've heard that one before, and we end up conceding a was it a stoppage time goal? And then, of course, Liverpool, when both teams were content to not play football, us especially, we had absolutely no interest in winning that game. Bastoni makes the inexplicable decision to pull on Wirt's shirt. We lose the game. So, two instances of what you said, a situation where we should have not accepted a loss. We should have been doing everything in our power to get a point, and we stopped playing. We stopped putting up a fight, and as a result, we've just deteriorated the situation for the club. Because if you want to talk big picture stuff, like if we're sitting here right now and this team, just say we draw one of those games, the outlook on this season is completely different. We're not here having another big game discussion. We would have pegged back an Atletico or Liverpool, and Atletico away at that, and you'd be feeling all right about yourselves. We'd actually have a decent shot of still finishing the top 8 of the Champions League. But look at what this is going to mean for the season now. So we're going to finish in that 9 through 24 range where you're going to have to go to the qualifying phase. And now we're going to have to play Champions League matches sandwiched around the Juve fixture. I think there another difficult Serie A fixture in there, and it just completely congests the calendar in February. When for a team whose primary goal this season is to win a Scudetto, you're making that all that much harder because you couldn't get the job done against Liverpool, against Atletico. So it has a compounding effect, and it's just this team's inability to stay out of its own way. So what do you do now? Do you even try in the Champions League? You know you have no chance of winning this competition. You know that your best case scenario is you like get a fluky draw against poor opponents and end up in a quarterfinal. Is that really what we play for? Or do you accept what is a damned fate, put all your eggs in the Scudetto baskets, and try and get number 21? It's a really tough situation. This game against Dortmund next week means practically nothing now that we're locked into ending up in the qualifying phase. And it, think about how awful last season was, really on all fronts. Thinks about how much this team struggled, and that was with two less games than we're staring at right now in this horrible February time period. I just want you to think back to last season. January and February was when the wheels really fell off last season. That's when this team collapsed. We were playing great. We were checking all our boxes up until the February timeframe, and that's when our league form completely collapsed. So we're entering the danger zones here, and we keep talking about the players and how they're going to respond, and it's really time for them to step up, because if we're not careful, we're looking at some tough matches. We're looking at a lot of potentially dropped points, and for once again for a season whose right now looks like all our hopes and dreams are going to come down to a Scudetto, We need to get this job done and we need to prioritize the league over the Champions League because this team is not going far in the Champions League.
Yeah, and that's a great point to make. And doesn't it just kind of make you angrier thinking about the lack of foresight from management, from leadership, from the players themselves? I mean, these guys are professionals. They know what the schedules are. They know how difficult the fixture congestion can be. And as you so rightly said, if they just concentrated, not been complacent, not thought the job was done for like a combined 7 minutes against Liverpool and Atleti, we might not be having this conversation. On top of that, you've got the absolute just, I mean, what do you even want to call it at this stage? It's like somewhere between negligence and a rank incompetence from the ownership where it's now the 21st of January, and I think we've signed some dipshit from Croatia for like 3 million. And it looks like we might be signing that other dipshit, Malacic. Sounds like we might be going back for him. But like these are inconsequential. These are nothing transfers, right? These have zero impact upon our goals. Or they make zero contribution towards our goals this season. And yet the management still refuses to do anything.
I'm trying not to rip into Morata every time I talk about this team on this podcast, but I'm really struggling to give him any credit for last summer's Mercato because of the Luis Enrique and Diouf things. Because we talk about like needing a new pillar, a new star player in the team, and apparently the money was there because we were talking about Lookman and Kone, and then so instead of signing one of those two players, instead of going out and saying, okay, what other like injection of life can we give this team for 50 million euro, for 40 million euro? We inexplicably decide to go and just panic buy Diouf. And a lot of this team's problems for me are linked back to that Diouf signing, our complete lack of depth in the midfield, the fact we don't have a proper Hakan replacement. These are all linked to us panic buying this guy who no one had even heard of up until the eve of his signing. And as always, this management team needs to be perfect if we want to be good. But that was that this one really grinds my gears because that was our chance to really go out and sign an impact player, and we completely passed on it. We signed this great unknown, and as a result, we're kind of in the situation we're always in, which is that we're trying to integrate a young player into the squad who's probably not good enough. So if I were to like sit here and we
Mate,
haven't really
the
talked
last
about.
the
Go
the
ahead.
the, the Mercato was a 0 out of 10 if it wasn't for Akanji. Akanji alone brings it up to like a 6 because Akanji, or 5 rather, because Akanji is a great player and we got him at a great price. Uh, he should have been brought in addition to keeping Pavard. That's how you that's how you deepen a department, not by subtracting one and adding one. You keep one and add another. That's what the good clubs do. That's why Arsenal's bench shits on ours. That's why their
That's why
bench made a
Arsenal's bench is
difference.
worth 500 million and ours is worth 4.
Exactly. That's why uh that's why partly our season collapsed last season because Inzaghi had the likes of Correa and Arnautovic and Aslani on the bench instead of someone who could compete with Hakan, someone who could compete with Mkhitaryan, someone who could compete with Lautaro or Thuram. Uh, but yes, sorry to go back to your point.
Now, I guess if I were to make one, I want to wrap this thing up soon. If I were to make one overarching point for this podcast, it's that I want to break up with this core players. I want to see a change this summer where we go out and we sell Taram, we sell Hakan, we do something different, and we sign someone with some street cred who's going to come in and demand respect of other players and not some developmental prospect who we're praying Kivu molds. Because I'm tired of watching Taram labor around the pitch and not be involved and looks like he's about to die every time he gets the ball. I'm tired of Lautaro and having to defend his inexplicable performances in these big games. Lautaro and Barella were so bad yesterday that Kivu made them his first subs off the pitch. We haven't talked about that at all. You haven't talked about that at all. And I know you're usually willing to rip these guys a new one. It's tough because there's just so much to talk about from yesterday's game. But our core players has continued to let us down, and it's time to shake it up. And if that means Barcelona wants to come make us some sweetheart offer for Bastoni, whatever, man, I don't even care at this point. But we need to do something. We need proper change if we ever want to expect different results. Hopefully, we can get a Scudetto here. Hopefully, we can, send the boys off one time. Last season we were talking about winning a Champions League, so a Cherby, Mkhitaryan, and Summer could retire. Well, now I'm praying we win a Scudetto so that we can all retire and we can figure this thing out once and for all because this can't keep going on or it's only going to get worse.
Well said.
Well, Miko's going to yell at us if we don't say one positive thing about yesterday's game. So give me a positive takeaway. Do you want to talk about Pio injecting life into the team?
um, Not really, to be honest. I mean, he did okay. I still feel like he goes to ground way too easily, and it's getting to a point where it's starting to annoy me quite a lot. Uh, I will I will say that Sucic showed some class. Uh, he's still young. I still don't rate him that highly, to be honest. I felt like he was guilty of overcomplicating a couple good chances as well, especially that one where we were 3-on-1 and somehow ended up
Yes.
with Turan blazing over the crossbar from a narrow, acute angle instead of, you know, being square onto the goal. Um, but obviously his goal was nice. He managed to do something that our captain, our leader, our most experienced, longer serving player, and according to himself, seventh best player in the world, who doesn't get enough respect, hasn't been able to do in like 12 games, and that is score against a big opponent. Uh, and there was one other moment where he set up DeMarco pretty nicely, showing a bit of finesse. So that's really it. I thought everyone else was pretty fucking abject, to be honest. I must say there were very, very, very few positives to take away, but you are right with what you said earlier, which was that there were parts of the game where we were fine. We were in the ascendancy for a period of time. Uh, we were accelerating towards getting some real chances, creating some genuine goal scoring opportunities. But if that's at like if a goal comes at like a 10 and, we are kind of ramping up, and like dangerous chances come at like a 8 or whatever, we were ramping up and then we just kind of stopped at like a 6.8, maybe like a 7.2. You know what I'm saying? And that,
We,
that's and that's why I say that it infuriates me that these guys always do this. They always do just enough where you can give them a tiny bit of credit to say, oh, it looks like we were about to get a goal if we had continued applying pressure and, continued putting our foot on the gas. But we fucking didn't. So who gives a fuck?
I saw a lot of people trying to blame Summer for yesterday's result, and I'm the first one. Summer is not good. He needs to be benched. I'll be the first one to make that argument. But I don't think playing Joseph Martinez gets us a different result yesterday because this team is just so fundamentally broken in these games because eh, we have the positive spell, we have the ball, we look dangerous, but we never actually do the job. We never actually finish it. So we have the great opportunity in the break yesterday with Sucic who over dribbles and decides not to pass to Barella. And it's a prime opportunity for us to take control of a game. Inter against Barcelona last year in that situation, we would have laid it off to Barella. He would have scored a curler and we would have been up in that fixture. But it's not who this iteration of Inter is. We are the team that passes in these big moments. We are the team that overplays in these big moments. And as I said a few moments ago, this team is not going far in the Champions League this year. We need to accept that fate. It's clear to us that Kivu and the boys haven't figured it out. Three straight Champions League losses for the first time in Inter history. Uh, History. I don't care the format has changed. I don't care who the games have been about, against rather. First time we've ever lost 3 Champions League matches in a row. And to your point, this is a club with a pathetic history in the Champions League. The first 3 years of my Inter fandom, like, we were basically out in the round of 16 quarterfinals every year in the Champions League. We have never been good at this.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, uh, th- the two bright spots, the two brief interruptions to this
Whoops.
miserable existence in the Champions League have been Mourinho and Inzaghi, and to kind of to create a record that somehow exceeds the general level of shitness that it's been, despite the fact that we've been, a bit of a pariah in the Champions League for so long, and yet we still managed to never stoop to losing 3 games in a row. It says a lot about this group, man.
Alright, well, we've gotta wrap it there because I have to go to work. I will, as always, let Jay do the honor.
Uh, I am proud to support Inter Milan.
You will be after Lautaro scores his hat trick against Pisa on Friday.
I have no doubt in my mind.
Alright, well, Forza Inter. We'll catch you all next time.